How you guys doing? My name is Malik Sparrow, director of Kapitol Art Labs. I'm sitting here with the infamous Hamilton Glass, famous muralist, Philadelphia native, and Richmond resident. How you doing?
Good. Glad to be here.
To start it off, I'm gonna ask you a pretty unorthodox question to ask an artist for the first question. And this is kind of something that, I wanted to ask based on doing my research on you just in general, your background, before you actually became an artist. If you were to read up on him, you would come to find out that a lot of his background is based in architecture. And I just wanted to ask you, what is your background exactly in architecture specifically?
Yeah, so I went to Hampton University and went into architecture, chose architecture as a major just because I thought there was no money in art. I've always been that creative kid who did art for himself and fell into that stereotype of you can't be an artist because artists make no money. Mm-hmm. And so architecture was something that I chose because it was perceived as, you can make a little bit of money in architecture, but it was also on hit that creative side.
I got you.
I went into architecture and probably almost immediately I was like, this is not what I want to do. And so I didn't jump out of architecture after that. It was still creative, but it was like, I didn't want to, it was just the pressure. I didn't want to waste my mom's money for school.
Okay.
So I stuck with it and kind of did everything backwards. I was designing before I thought about the theology of architecture, you know what I mean? I kept it really creative. And I enjoyed school. I just knew once I got out of school that that's not what I wanted to do. And then I graduated from Hampton with a bachelor's in architecture and went straight into architecture. I couldn't figure out what else I could do. And I practiced for 8 years.
Okay.
Practiced up in New York, Philadelphia, in Richmond for a little bit until the recession hit and I lost my position in architecture and kind of just started doing art because that was like my foundation.
Yeah.
All the while still looking for a job in architecture.
I feel
And what happened was while I was doing art, the year that I lost my position, I created more art than I ever created in my whole life. And I came across some really good opportunities, did some murals. I'm being from Philadelphia, murals are something that just I saw all the time and saw a lack of in Richmond. And so when I had the opportunity to create some here, they kind of just took off. I think it was something that Richmond didn't see much of. There were some, but not a lot. And I think being from up north gave Richmond something that they didn't see before, if that makes any sense.
And I don't even mean to cut you off, but that's an interesting point where you mentioned there wasn't much, there weren't many murals in Richmond at a certain point because, of course, for people like us or people like me that are my age who are familiar with the area, we know the area for having, plenty of murals, plenty of artwork, and of course, just for being just everybody just kind of being involved in the culture just in general. Yeah, I thought that was interesting because, now it seems like there's murals all over the place in Richmond right now.
Yeah.
So would you say that, because you've been around for a long time, and like you just said, you were one of the first people probably doing a lot of murals out here. Would you say that your influence on the Richmond community may have, kind of started somewhat of like a renaissance of, just, murals and just, you see them all over the buildings now in the city. So would you say that?
Well, I wouldn't say that I started. I think that I was part of that first mural wave.
Okay.
There were a few artists here, like Ed Trask is probably the most well known, but there were a few artists here that were doing things, but because of the culture in Richmond, they weren't getting off the ground.
Okay.
And so I definitely was one of the first artists that rode that first wave. And so if you can imagine those artists that I just described trying to chug ahead and then having somebody like me come along, like giving even more validation to it. And then you had Art Wino's Richmond Mural Project come and do things here. Those two things, the combination of those things is what really sparked it. And you have to give it to Art Wino for bringing their Richmond mural project here, but also Ed Trask's Street Art Festival, which kicked off. Both of those things hit Richmond at the same time in 2012.
Okay.
April of 2012, and the city kind of received over 30 murals in a month.
Oh, wow.
And most people don't know that, but
Wow.
they received 30 murals in a month, and it was kind of just like mural fever after that.
Oh, that's actually really interesting information. I did not know that at all. So that actually makes a lot of sense as to why there are so many murals around here
Right.
and how that kind of all started. But that's really interesting and dope. I'm gonna ask you the second question. You know, of course, we were just touching on your background in architecture. How would you say that plays into your current style of artwork?
Oh, that's a great question. I think, especially when I tell my story about architecture, a lot of people think, well, would you go back into art? Like if you woke up and it was 2000, the year 2000, that's when I started college. Would you go back? Would you go to school for art? I would go right back into architecture, because I think architecture honestly gave me the will to do. And a lot of the technical drawing and a lot of the scale, a lot of those things, those skills I use in my art all the time.
Okay.
I think it kind of gave me a basis, a foundation of like color theory too, coupling color theory with technical drawing, which you see a lot of like the shapes and the movement in my work.
Definitely.
A lot of that stuff comes straight from architecture, and it kind of shaped what I do with my art.
Okay, that's interesting. Coming up in a place like Philadelphia, which I know you're from, where the art, at least as we know, is so prominent, did you have any influences around that helped you shape your own style?
Absolutely. So the Philadelphia Mural Arts Program was, without knowing, it influenced me, like being a grown adult now, knowing of it played a really big part in how I saw art. And that, I think, spoke to when I came to Richmond and felt so out of place with the murals and public art not being there. It was just so ingrained in me in Philadelphia. In Philadelphia, you can't walk down the street one block without seeing a piece of public art, you know what I mean? And it was so reflective of the community that was around. It wasn't just art for art's sake, but it was art that spoke. It either involved the community or it spoke directly to it.
I got you.
And so that was like, it was almost like it was the blueprint for my work here in Richmond, you know what I mean? It just, my work, I could only hope that at the end of the day, my work reflects, what I saw growing up in Philadelphia.
That's cool. That's a really interesting take, actually. What was your first medium of art? As of course, right now we know you do painting. You do large scale murals, which is you would say it's contemporary art, correct? Yeah, and it's all largely painting. Was that your first medium of art, or what was your first medium? And what factors contributed into how your initial practice developed into what you do now?
That's a good question. So my first medium art was just sketching. I think I was like, I have the traditional artist story where I just was really into drawing what I saw.
I was the same.
Yeah, exactly, right? And then you do it, and then you wonder, like, why doesn't it look like what I'm looking at? And so you just kind of obsess over trying to make things look realistic. I got into comic books for a bit, so I was trying to, create cartoons and things like that. And so I can remember my mother trying to put me in every single art class known to man, and I can remember hating it, and having conversations with her now, and her telling me, like, I remember being 13 and being in this room in the Philadelphia Art Institute of people who were triple my age, and wondering, like, why are they trying to tell me what to do and how I can create? And
I feel you.
And I just really disliked it. And talking with my mom now, it was because every art class they put me in, they would tell her I was too advanced for it, so she would just put me up another level until I was in this class, you know what I mean, where I wasn't enjoying art anymore.
I got you.
And so Yeah, I really, and I did art for myself. I wasn't thinking that I was going to be an artist. You know what I mean? So it really was something I just sketched, and painting was something that came after just trying to emulate everything.
Okay. Well, let me ask you a question too. You use a really key word, obsession, just in general, and I feel like that's a very important word, pretty much for anybody who does something and they love what they do, and they're passionate about what they're doing. A lot of times, the obsession is kind of what allows you to develop your skill set to get to a certain point. That's kind of the foundation that kind of maybe determines what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life. I know me personally, as an artist, the obsession at one point is obviously what started my trajectory to even be where I'm at now, years later, of course. So, just in general, like, how would you say obsession, over your craft is so important, especially coming up as an artist?
Yeah, it's absolutely important. I think, so one of my philosophies is that anybody can do anything. Your love for something feeds that obsession. So I could swim just as fast as Michael Phelps, but I don't have a love for it to obsess for it like that, like he does, if that makes any sense. So I can't do it, if that makes any sense.
I feel you.
And so obsession is something also where it always strives you to get better. So, I'll finish a mural and everyone will tell me, "Oh, that's beautiful, that's great." Usually, I don't think that it's beautiful and it's great. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like, I'm thinking,
curse of an artist.
Exactly. You're thinking, I know where every mistake on this thing is. I'm through with it. It's not as good as I want to do, but I've learned my lessons on this one. Time to move on. Time to move on and think. If you are at a point where you're like, this is great, my work is great, then you need to be doing something else. You know what I mean? That means that drive to get better is gone.
Yeah, you're right. And that falls into almost anything. Like, once you start to get complacent, when you start to get comfortable, that's when you stop moving forward. That's when you stop making progress. That's when the dots stop connecting really too.
Exactly.
So, but no, yeah, that's really dope to hear that, like, you also feel that obsession is such an important part of the process when you want to do something that you love to do. At the end of the day, the next person, if they don't love what they're trying to do, eventually they're going to quit because they're never going to find that obsession. They're always going to be miserable. You know what I mean?
Exactly. It's just a way to get better.
Exactly. Talk about some of the pieces in which you've created to display at VMFA for Black History Month.
Yeah, so in 2019, I approached the VMFA about doing a project for Black History Month that celebrated and uplifted some of the grassroots leaders here in Richmond, and have those people be celebrated for organizations they work with, the work that they're doing, and get those people to come to the VMFA and their communities to come to the VMFA to celebrate them, but also celebrate and network together so they would know it's just be a bigger circle.
Okay.
And so in doing that, I partnered with the VMFA and we picked 8 individuals in the greater Richmond area, and those 8 individuals were to be painted and celebrated on their American Reading Night. And so that project went off super well. It displayed here for a week, but we also partnered with the Black History Museum, and it displayed there for 6 months, and now it's currently hanging in City Hall.
Oh wow!
And so we are doing it again this year, but this year we're basing it around photography.
Okay.
I'm going to be doing the title board, so we always have a community engagement aspect of that part. For the first one, we had people come out, and kids and adults were able to come paint on those portraits, and then I finished them off.
Okay.
This year we have, since it's based around photography, we have photographers taking pictures of people's families, and I'm incorporating those pictures into a painting on the title board of the project.
Oh wow! Okay.
And so, outside of the title board, this year we're doing 6 grassroots leaders. So, organizers and leaders. Okay. So those 6 individuals will be photographed and taken by 6 other professional photographers, and they'll be displayed in the VMFA atrium.
So you do some really, really large pieces. Of course, you know, your murals are extraordinary. They're huge. You can see them if you're driving past it anywhere. You know, so me personally as an artist, I remember, you know, looking at an 18 by 24 canvas and looking at it and just being so anxious as to where I would start, how I was going to kind of map this out, you know, and then I see you doing these large scale pieces, you know, so we just want to know, like, and a lot of artists probably would too, how do you get over, you know, that anxiety that comes with, you know, manifesting an idea, you know, into something physical?
Yeah, so murals are one of those things, at least for myself, are one of those things where you really kind of have to let it go, if that makes any sense. Like if you try to plan too much, there are so many obstacles on the wall and things that I think doesn't translate into a small piece of paper.
I got you.
And so me personally, I try to let the wall determine where things are going, but also my work is about movement. So my shapes, that technical drawing that I was talking about, the use of colors and things like that. My guiding force, my foundation is movement, and so that really plays into the aesthetic that I use. It plays into how I do things. If I were to start a project on one day and then, you know, start it the next week, it would look totally different because that infill of movement and things like that, that infill of color, it just really goes on how I'm feeling that day.
I feel you.
And so I don't recreate exactly what I sketch up. Every every mural is a little bit different than its initial sketch. And the process in doing something like that is really just kind of putting the client's mind at ease to say, like, this is how I work. This is what I do. I need that creative freedom to you know what I mean, to make the best product for you. I'm going to make sure all your themes are there. Yeah. I'm going to make sure, you know, everything you're trying to convey is there. But I need that creative liberty to kind of go with the flow.
Okay. Interesting. What are some of the pieces in which you're most proud of? And looking back, is there anything that you would change about any of the work that you've done?
So let me answer the last question first. I don't think I would change anything. It's really something that I'm just building on. It's doing stuff. Like I said before, I'm never 100% happy with anything that I do. There's so much more flaw in my head than probably everybody else sees. But that just gives me another, you know, step to step up on for my next piece.
Okay.
The pieces that I'm most proud of are the pieces that I work with, especially like nonprofits and things like that have a cause, if that makes any sense. I do a lot of work with nonprofits and community organizations that really mean something, that really maybe the students help design it. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's speaking to some type of push that, you know, that organization is saying. But most of my work is with community organizations, and it involves more than me. Does that make any sense?
Yeah,
so
definitely.
It's bigger than me, and I love when people kind of look past the art and they see that message that we're trying to convey in it, and then it'll last forever.
Yeah,
like the message.
That's how art becomes timeless.
It'll last forever. Maybe the mural doesn't last forever, but the message will, and people will clue into that mural every time they think of that message.
I got you. Very interesting. And why is it so important? You know, you mentioned, you know, doing things with kids, you know, with the youth. I noticed you've done workshops, you know, you've done murals, like you said, in which the kids have helped you create the entire piece. You know, why is it so important for you, or why do you think it's so important for all successful artists to pass the spirit of innovation and creativity down to the next generation?
That's a good question. I ask myself that a lot, and I think it's the power of art. I think art is an activating element that everybody can kind of clue into. I mean, everybody has some type of art whether it's painting or sculpture or poetry or theater, everybody has some type of art in which moves them and puts them in a creative mode. And I think that using art as a tool to encourage creativity helps everybody in every other aspect of their life. And so being able to work with kids is something actually really special to me, because if you remember, I said I never thought I could be a full-time artist. So here I am in front of other kids, giving them a real-life example of something I never thought could be. And I thought that because I didn't have an example.
Exactly.
So I'm trying to make it full circle. So they have that example, they have that representation. They also are able to see that this is a viable thing. It's not just something we go do to have fun, but it's something that can feed their soul.
Exactly. Because in 2020, the illusion of the starving artist is dead.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, the illusion of the starving artist is dead. Like,
Exactly.
and if you understand the industry, honestly, too, like even outside of just, physical art itself, just, the industry of, just anything creative, a lot of times, the people at some of the highest positions, what they're bringing to the table a lot of times is highly creative, in a lot of different cases, like a lot of VPs of different companies and things of that nature, it's highly creative. So, it's just in general, like a lot of things have moved to where it's like, the creatives and the artists and the people that can come up with the ideas and, do different things like that, more value is kind of being placed on us as well, which I feel is extremely important. And, touching back on the kids, of course, I wanted to ask you a few more questions on that based on like the workshops you've done and stuff like that with children. What do you feel you get most out of those experiences? And also, what do you think that's most important that they get out of those experiences as well?
So what I think that they get most important is just my example. I think they get, in order to do, you must have a reference, if that makes any sense. And then understanding my example, hopefully they take it to a whole nother level. And I personally usually just get the joy of seeing them do. Though, I'm a firm believer of the power of the art, but it always shows me its face in a different way. A lot of kids, and they, sometimes they're kind of a little starstruck in meeting me because they're like, oh, here's this guy who does these big, huge things. How does he do it?
Yeah.
But I'm usually starstruck at how sometimes when I put a task in front of them, the direction they put, I don't think of half of the things a lot of those kids do. And I think, kids always have that aspect of creativity that you kind of lose as an adult. You're thinking about money, you're thinking about all of these things that make it tangible, and they're not. They're thinking about all of these things that make it great.
Exactly.
And so it's always humbling working with kids, and it keeps me on my toes. It keeps me thinking about newer and fresher ideas just working with them.
That's cool. And that's just, to me personally, I think that's extremely impressive just because of the fact that I know that not all artists in your position, necessarily want to, or do they even at all do things that kind of reach back to the youth, to where they kind of give that example. Because, you're from Philadelphia, you're probably not from this, the most wealthiest side of Philadelphia. I'm not from the wealthy side of where I'm from, which is Norfolk, Virginia. And, I know I can speak for myself when I say there wasn't a lot of examples. And, Richmond is another area in which there really aren't many examples, in people that look like our own. There's not a lot of examples in our neighborhoods, as far as people that are going to push you towards doing anything creative. A lot of times, if you want to do something creative, sometimes it's looked at as weird or different or, just something that's not cool, up until a certain point, of course. So I think that's just extremely important, just providing that, that role model type of, pretty much something that you can look at,
right?
That you can look at and know, like you said, that this is possible. Exactly. This is something that you can attain. At the end of the day, some of these kids that you're doing these workshops with, some of them might want to grow up one day and become an artist, and I'm sure you've had those conversations with some of them, and I know you probably can tell like the impact you had on, doing the workshop with them, even having a conversation with them, and letting them know that, like we said, this is possible, and it's like we said, the illusion of the starving artist is dead, and really the possibilities for creatives nowadays are just endless.
Absolutely, it's really amazing, because a lot of the kids that I get to work with, sometimes I'll present opportunities out to the community, say, hey, if you want to, come paint this afternoon, come to, blah, blah, blah. And kids that I've worked with on projects a year or 2 years ago they'll get their parents to shoot out emails to say, hey, can John come work with you again?
Yeah.
For this? And it's amazing, because I know it's just reaffirming to me that they had a great time.
Mm-hmm.
And kids, sometimes they complain, it's hot, I don't want to do this. But here they are again.
Yeah.
Shooting out an email saying, hey, we want to come back and do it.
Most definitely. And actually, before we close this out, I just wanted to, I know I'm really focused on the youth with a lot of stuff I say, but it's just kind of just important to me. But I don't know, like, it's just interesting to me how, like, certain kids, like, in a lot of cases, kind of just touching back on how I was saying, like, they come up in places where it's not necessarily cool to be creative, or it's not necessarily, it's really interesting to me how, like, sometimes it can be one experience, or one thing that can completely just shift your mind frame, have you grasp onto something, and then completely just run with it from probably for the rest of your life.
Exactly.
And it's just like, you were saying how, like, kids, as we all know, they kind of still have, their brain is a little more malleable. Of course, they're still very creative, like you said, we get older, we're worried about money and all these things like that. But I personally feel like as artists and creators, we kind of keep some of a kid-like nature as we kind of, grow older even, because we're still kind of expressing ourselves creatively, and things of that nature. So,
that's a good point.
To be able to have that side as an artist, of course, and then bring that, or not necessarily bring it out of a kid, but in a sense plant a seed to where they can kind of maintain, in a sense, some of that same type of creative spirit. I think that's extremely powerful in itself. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. So I just want to thank you guys once again for tuning in. I want to thank Hamilton Glass for being a guest. Thank you, good sir. And this is our first series of Lab Talks. I want to make sure you guys tune in next time to our second volume. We have workshops coming up in Richmond soon, February 29th at Working Friends Richmond on Broad Street. Make sure you get your tickets for that via Eventbrite. And we're going to see you guys in the next interview.